Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod, and this is the Monday Night Review. We are on what is basically the last day of the holidays. My kids are inside watching some terrible TV show. The eldest starts secondary school tomorrow, and the other two go back on Wednesday. And although I am looking forward to being able to listen to unsuitable audiobooks about weird history and true crime and stuff without having to worry about little ears being disturbed, I do really like the summer holidays. I am going to miss the little blighters. How was your summer? I hope it was good. My 11-year-old walked into my bedroom on the 1st of September talking about pumpkin spice latte and can we go to Home Sense to get some Halloween stuff, and he's just thrilled that autumn is here. So that's nice. I always feel like September is actually the start of the year. I really don't like New Year. I don't particularly hate January, but I don't like, there's something very weighted about New Year that I don't like. Whereas September, I feel like, yeah, let's get shit done got 3 months before the end of the year. Let's do it. And I quite like that. But I love the summer holidays, especially now the kids are older. Now we're not living in London, so that there's just, there just feels like a lot of freedom for me and my children now that they're a bit older, and that's lovely. So I'm going to miss that. There's a massive case that I've been researching, and I've been talking about it for bloody months, and you've probably all got bored. But there's a TV show that I'm watching that's really good that I will recommend as soon as I do the episode. I don't know why I like the element of surprise, but I really do. And so you'll have to wait. I'm hoping that part 1 will be out next week. Speaking of element of surprise, I am a makeup artist, for those of you that don't know, and I was invited to a friend's party. She said, will you come to the party and will you do my makeup? It's a sort of festival theme. And I was like, yeah, sure, great. Didn't really think anything of it. She wanted me to do her makeup an hour and a half after the party started, which I was like, oh, okay, that's weird, but fine. We arrived, we had drinks, it was really fun. And then she said, this is our 10-year anniversary party. We've got 3 kids. So we've decided that this afternoon we're going to get married. Woo! I loved it. Totally awesome surprise. Anyway, it was so much fun, and I keep thinking about it and keep being like, woohoo, that was so much fun. I feel like, though, I was being bought neurodivergently out of storage. I don't really struggle not drinking anymore now. I've done 2 years. That's okay. But social situations like that, a very good reason why I don't drink, because I would have been, that kind of situation would have made me at my most outrageous self, and booze does not help that. But without the booze, it's very difficult when you've been sort of barefoot and with horses or children for the 6 weeks to suddenly be with loads of grown-ups who are drinking and having like party time, and you're sober. But it's good. It's good for me to do. I had to go to a party the next day, and I was much more eloquent than the night before. Anyway, because I've been focusing on this big topic for so long, today's episode is going to be a quickie. Well, it's not necessarily going to be a quickie. I'm rambling. But it's not going to be as long as I usually like them to be, because all my energy, all my thought process is going into this other case. But today we're going to Southampton, which is half an hour down the road from me, half an hour down the road from when I grew up. We are going to be about 50 years before I was born, though, I should say. So this is, although it is local to me, it is not during my time. But yes, we're off to Southampton. My sources for this were Hampshire Murders by Nicholas Sly, Murderpedia, Wikipedia. There's loads of stuff on the internet about this case, but all of it is slightly conflicting, and a lot of it doesn't seem to have any sources to back it up. So again, I've kept it quite bare bones. With anything that I've found repeated over and over, or from a really reliable source, then I've used it. I don't know why. I don't know that many of you go away and check the sources. There are certain cases where once I put it up on YouTube, people get quite rabid about it. As you can imagine, Jean-Benet Ramsey was one of those. Sophie Toussaint de Plantier, a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions about that. and therefore it really sets you back if you're trying to tell the story and I'm not an investigative journalist, I'm not trained in any kind of forensics or police work or anything like that. And it can really set you back when people are like, you didn't mention this, and you're like, I can't mention everything. This is not my full-time job. Whereas this one, it is going to be really bare bones because there's not that much information. But everywhere you look, it's seen as a landmark case in British criminal history, and I can't see it myself. I don't. I mean, there may be a lot of info that I'm missing and I can't find it, but I wonder what you think. On the 10th of January 1929 in Southampton, just 30 minutes away from me, and if you're not from the UK or this area, if you look at the UK, if you look at England, it's right in the middle at the bottom, basically, just above the Isle of Wight. There you'll find Portsmouth and Southampton next to each other-ish. So 2 men are examining the interior of a long padlocked garage that had previously been used as a storeroom by a local agent of the Wolf's Head Oil Company. So these agents sell the oil and make commission, and this is where the man had stored his oil supply. One of the men searching was Henry Passmore. He'd just secured the job of local agent, and he is now looking over his predecessor's supplies. The 2 men had found a car with no petrol outside, and they then had to break the padlock to get access to the garage. And they are going through the stacks of boxes when Passmore trips over something. This is a trigger warning for those sensitive of stomach. Looking down, he sees the decomposing body of a man. Distressingly, rats had eaten away so much of the man's face that it would be really hard to identify him. But they were able to find keys in his pocket, and when the police came, they took the keys, and it actually fitted to the door of the lodgings where the local agent had lived. So they were able to put 2 and 2 together and come up with 4. There was a hole in the head of the body, which led police to initially suspect that he had been shot, but they would find out that this was not the case. Now, the missing agent's name was William Podmore. He is 57, divorced, known to travel extensively but keep himself to himself. He wasn't a sort of huge people person. He didn't have a blaring social life. And he had last been seen on the 30th of October 1928. And that evening he'd failed to return to his lodgings. And his landlord, ex-police officer Albert Parrott, reported him missing. There are some absolutely... if you showed me this, I would assume that Agatha Christie had written it. We've got Albert Parrott, we've got Vivian Messiter, we've got a Prothero coming up. It is classic Agatha Christie in terms of names. So Albert Parrott, who obviously understands how things work, reports his tenant missing. Sadly for Albert Parrott, he would later have to identify the body as well. And police do go and have a look, and they're unable to find anything. So even though Messiter has left, leaving all of his stuff behind, all of his clothing, it's just assumed that he's gone off on one of his travels. Now, his employers write to Messiter several times over the next 10 weeks to find out where he is, what's going on, why he's not turned up for work. And eventually they fill his position. So that's where Henry Passmore comes in. How much of his work he'll want to do, having just basically trodden on the decomposing body of his predecessor, history does not relate. Police had initially been to this garage to check out what was going on when Messiter was reported missing, but it was locked up, so they didn't feel the need to check inside. Obviously, it looks all secure and locked. His car was outside at the time, I believe, but that didn't cause them any suspicion. But that's one of the things that's dodgy on this case. Was the car outside? Was it not? Now that he'd been found, they searched the garage and his lodgings to see if they could find any clues, any information as to who would want him dead. And This was a very serious crime, obviously, and Southampton police immediately sent a telegram to Scotland Yard requesting their assistance. And Scotland Yard sent Chief Inspector Prothero, who took charge of the investigation immediately. Meanwhile, while the police were searching, the autopsy was being carried out by Sir Bernard Spilsbury, who came up with some interesting finds. The cause of death was in fact multiple severe blunt force trauma to the skull, so much so that, quote, it was fractured everywhere except on the top. The examination of the crime scene further revealed the presence of extensive blood spatter to the height of several feet up these crates and boxes, which confirmed that Messiter had been murdered in the garage. Spilsbury said that at least 2 hits had been while the head was flat against a hard surface, and so from that he deduced that it was likely that Messiter had been hit from behind once and then repeatedly on the floor once he was down. A hammer was found near to the garage with blood on the handle and hair on the handle. Now, the hammer was traced to belonging to a builder's merchants not far from where the garage was, and they remembered lending the hammer to someone. The hair on the hammer handle was later matched to the victim's eyebrow hairs, and the injuries were consistent with a hammer. So it's concluded that this hammer is the murder weapon. In the garage, they also find a screwed up piece of paper with the name William Thomas on it. When police search Messiter's lodgings, they discover a reply to an advertisement for a salesman job with the company, with the Wolf's Head Oil Company, from William F. Thomas. In Messiter's car, they find a receipt book with the top 3 pages missing, and police were able to see from the imprint on the remaining pages underneath that they were receipts for sales made to 2 companies by someone with the initials WFT. The receipt also gave the address of a lodgings house in Southampton, and the lady who owned and ran this house was called Mrs. Horn. So off they go to speak to Mrs. Horn. Now, she remembers a Mr. and Mrs. Thomas who came to stay in a couple of weeks in October. Notably, she really remembered them because they'd left in a hurry, leaving only a false forwarding address and a scrap of paper on which was written the word Podmore and an address in Manchester. She was also able to give them good descriptions of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, and so the police go to the newspapers to appeal for any information, and they put out the descriptions given to them by Mrs. Horn and an example of this writing that they find that has Podmore written on it. So William Frank Thomas is described as a mechanic, about 5'5", clean shaven, dark hair with a distinctive 1-inch scar on his temple. Mrs. Thomas, known as Lil, was about 30 with dyed blonde hair, and seeing this description in the paper, police were soon contacted by a number of people, one of whom was Mitchell's, a building company in Wiltshire, who had employed William Thomas as a mechanic during December. He'd actually done really good work, but had left suddenly at around the 23rd of December, mysteriously at the same time as the firm's wage packet of about £130, which is around £6,800 today, also mysteriously vanished. Police were eventually able to identify William Thomas as William Henry Podmore and Mrs. Thomas as Lily Hambleton. They tracked her down first in Stoke-on-Trent. What happened in Stoke-on-Trent, everyone? Slash was born there. And she agrees to go to Southampton for questioning. And she seems very cooperative, and she tells them that Podmore is staying at the Leicester Hotel in London. So Scotland Yard sends some officers there, and Podmore is found in bed and is promptly arrested. When Podmore arrives in Southampton for questioning. He says that he agreed to meet Messiter at the garage on the 30th of October, having applied for the job to sell motor oil, but said that while he was there was another man present whose name he couldn't really remember, possibly Mr. Buxton or Mr. Moxton. And when Podmore had left, the men, Messiter was still alive and well, and this Mr. Buxton was still there. He did admit to stealing the wages from Mitchell's in Wiltshire, and he later admitted to a burglary in Manchester. He said that he'd then gone to Southampton to cover his tracks. He'd met Messiter on the 27th of October, done a few jobs for him, and then Messiter had asked him to fix his car, which he had done. Then Podmore drove the car to Wiltshire as a test drive, which he says he had permission to do. It seems that he then took work with Mitchell's, the builders, and then when he stole the wages, he returned to Southampton. Finding the garage locked, he left the car outside. So this is what's really confusing for me, is he drives off with permission in Messiter's car. So say that's fine, and Messiter says, yes, you can take my car for 6 weeks. It seems an awfully long time for an agent who does sales to be without a vehicle. But then would you return the car, when the car is discovered, it's got no petrol in it? Would you leave the car that you've just borrowed with no petrol at all in it? That also seems very odd to me. I don't think you would lend someone a car for 6 weeks, and then I just find that hard to believe. Now, an initial inquest had been held when Messiter's body had been found, but it was reopened on the 15th of March, but there's insufficient evidence to charge Podmore. As he'd confessed to the robbery in Manchester, he was sentenced to 6 months in Strangeways prison for that. And when he was released, he was charged with stealing the wages from the Wiltshire builders and given another 6 months. When he was released again on the 17th of December 1929, he was immediately arrested and tried for the murder of Vivian Messiter. And he gets sent to, as is what happened at the time, he got sent to a magistrate. The magistrate agreed that he should be tried for murder, and this would happen at the next assizes in Winchester, which was going to be on March 1930. In the 12 or so months since his murder, the police had been very busy. They had made sure that they had as much evidence as possible and had come up with a theory, but it's very circumstantial evidence. The prosecution puts forward the theory that Podmore had written 3 receipts for fictitious sales of oil that he would then claim the commission on. When Messiter had discovered this, they had argued. Podmore had picked up the hammer and whacked the older man over the head with it. He'd then stolen Messiter's watch, which had been found in a cistern in Southampton, torn out the incriminating receipts, and gone. The court also heard from 2 inmates who had served time with Podmore, to whom he had admitted his guilt. Podmore, who had pleaded not guilty, of course, denied the conversation ever took place. The defence pointed out that there was no direct evidence linking Podmore to the murder. The murder weapon wasn't his. The man who had lent out the hammer in the first place failed to pick Podmore out of a lineup. There's no blood staining on any of his clothes. And most importantly for me, he'd owned up to his thefts, and none of them had ever involved any violence. In fact, he always seems to run away from trouble. He steals the wage packet and disappears out of the county. He does a robbery in Manchester and leaves. He is almost cowardly in not wanting to get caught. So it's for me, that's dodgy. Now, he himself says, and Lil say, that when they heard the story of Messiter's body being found, they went on the run and they split up, and that's why he went to London and she went to Stoke-on-Trent. As far as I'm concerned, they were together, they were common law wife and husband. So they hadn't split up to go their separate ways. They had split up because they didn't want to be caught, which is suspicious. But despite all of this evidence being very flimsy and circumstantial, it only took the jury 80 minutes, during which time they also had lunch, to return a verdict of guilty. The judge, Lord Hewitt, sentenced William Henry Podmore to death for the murder of Vivian Messiter. Though an appeal was immediately filed and then a plea for clemency requested from the Home Secretary, both were denied. And on the 22nd of April 1930, 29-year-old William Podmore was hanged by Thomas Pierpoint at Winchester Prison, dying instantly. Rather horribly, to round this case off, Mrs. Anne Podmore, William's mother, had taken out a life insurance policy on her son in February 1928, so way before the Messiter incident, and after he was executed, made a claim for it. Now, this is a fairly grisly thought for a mother to be making a claim on her son's life when he's just been hanged for murder. But this is also the interwar years where jobs are tough, life is tough, and she doesn't have, it doesn't sound like William Podmore was providing for her anyway, but it was kind of a difficult time, so you've got to take that into consideration. Now, she makes a claim for the full sum, and initially this is refused. As you can understand, they said, it's against public policy. He was hanged for murder. We're not going to pay out for that. And she makes an official complaint, and eventually it's ruled that it's against the law to withhold the payment, and the insurance company has to honour her claim to the full amount. Now, at the time, it's thought that the hairs on the hammer being identical to the victim's eyebrow hairs and the missing receipts are all a great find, and they've managed to prove that what was written on the missing receipts by looking at the imprints and all of that. And it's easy to look back with all the knowledge that we have now on forensics and that kind of thing to see that this is flimsy at best. But my problem with this is that there was a man hanged with no one thing linking him to the murder. There's the victim's hair on the murder weapons. There's nothing from Podmore on the murder weapon. There's nothing, he's not identified. That no one seems to have thought about how if you have an argument with someone and you bash them over the head with a hammer, you don't go down the road to the builder's merchants, politely ask to borrow a hammer, and then go back and whack someone on the head. So how did that work? It was premeditated and he was going to whack Messiter over the head all along, but to what end? This man is a thief. Whoever it was stole the gold watch, but it's found an assistant. It's not sold. There wasn't a great amount of money missing. So why... And I'm not saying that I don't think Podmore is guilty, but there is no way enough evidence for me to be more than 50-50 on this one, because he doesn't seem to be a violent man. He confesses and owns up to burglary, after which he runs away from all burglaries. He leaves the county. His wife doesn't say anything. There's just nothing except for the fact that, from what I've read, it's unclear as to why he has the car for 6 weeks. That to me is a little bit dodgy. And he could have just flipped out and murdered this man. But I can't work out to what benefit, because we know that he's not tied to the county. If Messiter was like, I know that you've been doing this fraudulently, I think it's much more likely that Podmore would just leave, go somewhere else. That seems to be his jam. And for me, there's definite gaps in this case, and I wouldn't feel confident at all saying it's a landmark in terms of police investigation, because there's no link. You can find lots of different things. It's like a jigsaw puzzle where they're getting points for finding the pieces. They've done one side of the puzzle and another side of the puzzle, and there's nothing in the middle. Well, that's fine, but that's not a completed puzzle for me. That is, there's something not quite sitting right with me here. I'd love to know what you think. Hopefully we'll be here next week. We'll have nailed the first week of school, and we will be doing part 1 of what I think is probably going to be 2 or 3 parts. And then I can move on mentally from thinking about this big case all the time. I love to hear from you. So please email me, theMondayNightRevue@gmail.com. You can get merch from the link in the bio. You can check out my reading list from the link in the bio and any recommended books. I want to hear from you about TV recommendations, book recommendations, cases you want me to cover, cases I've talked about that you know something about. That's one of my faves. I should probably do catch-up episodes, shouldn't I, on emails that people have sent me saying, I grew up next to that house or whatever, because those are excellent. For all the other August babies, I hope you had a great birthday month. And you can come and check out the Patreon, where there are lots of extra episodes and articles to read and discount codes. If you're a member, you get merch discount. So until next time, be kind, stay safe. Always check the back seat before you drive.